Welcome to this, our first in a series of videos that in my introductory video, I said that we'd be looking at various facets of financial planning. And this is the first of the educational videos. I did make quite a point of saying that we're looking at it from a top level point of view. We're not going to be going into too much detail, but certainly enough detail for you to get a fairly good idea of exactly the complexity of some of the aspects of financial planning and the absolute need to consult with suitably qualified people to get your financial plan right. This particular video, I've called it Your Financial Foundation, and I've got Sandy with me. Sandy, welcome. Thank you for giving us your time. Sandy has extensive experience in this area of financial planning, and I thought I'd invite her in just to have a bit of a chat about some of her experiences and just to kind of bring to life some of these extremely important points that you need to consider.
Thanks, Peter.
Sandy, the foundation stone upon which a financial plan is built is often the will.
The will, yeah.
So we'll talk about the will today and the implications of not having a properly structured will, a will structured in such a way that it's holistic, that it takes into account all your circumstances, the absolute importance of that. We'll also look at people with business interests and the implications for shareholders agreements, the business continuity should something happen to a shareholder. We'll look at estate liquidity, we'll look at providing or being able to set up structures to provide livable income for the family, make sure there's enough money for children's education, and then we'll also have a brief look at some of the implications of life cover, whether it's provided personally at your own insistence or whether it's provided by your employer. Let's first take a look at the will. I said earlier, it's the foundation stone, and it is.
Absolutely.
And in your experience, if we can just tell our viewers, how would you summarize the function of a will?
I think that ideally a will is a business transaction. It's something that is tangible and works and changes throughout your entire lifetime. Importantly, especially within the affluent sort of levels of society, a lot of them tend to have a will to leave a legacy behind, and the will impact thereafter on family members, beneficiaries, heirs, etc. For me, more importantly, a will must be looked at holistically, as with any person's personal estate or estate plan. We often address things in single sequence where we do a single needs analysis now but end up having to fix it later. And often in the will we address single needs, but over time those things change. And the thing is, I know of so many people that had a will from 10 years ago that haven't updated it.
Yes.
And it's amazing to see how people will go to a restaurant and spend $500 on a meal, but they won't spend $1,000 on a document that is vital to sort of dictating what happens once someone has passed away and how the beneficiaries are dealt with thereafter and your assets.
You raise such an important point, and people do lose perspective in terms of where they spend their money and how they ascribe priorities.
Yeah.
And I see it as well. I've seen it where people just don't pay attention to these things. And just by applying a bit of due thought and diligence to a document of this nature, update it regularly, make sure that it's relevant to prevailing circumstances, and when that day comes where you go to meet your maker, at least the family is taken care of and things work the way you want them to work.
100%.
The kind of things that are covered in a will. Okay, we understand the absolute importance of a will, and in a future video I think we'll go into a lot more detail around the will. But if we look at some of the main functions of a will, let's just outline them very quickly. I'd like to keep these videos, as I say, sort of high level, and then as we get into it, we can start drilling down into a bit more detail. But the more common functions of a will, things that can be addressed very simplistically in a will.
Yeah.
What's your view on that?
Children that are dependent on parents. The most important thing there is that making them aware of the fact that they are going to be taken care of once the breadwinner passes on. That the scrupulous uncles aren't going to grab the money and run in another direction, that they aren't going to be left for dust, I think wives, especially when the husband is a breadwinner and they don't earn an income throughout their lifetime, sometimes they're forced to go and work because there's nothing left to them, or often children are left the benefits in the will or in the client's estate, and the wife gets nothing. So those for me are very important. Also just a simple thing like informing family members how the person wants to be buried or cremated.
Yes,
for me, I would be horrified if I didn't know that my partner wanted to be cremated and I buried him. That is something that I wouldn't ever be able to live down. So
it causes a lot of friction
100%.
in families when, to deal with especially in an emotional time.
100%.
For sure. The other important thing is special bequests. There's family heirlooms that pass down through generations. The owner wants them to go to a daughter or a son. Those kind of things need to be determined and put in the will, so that the executor's job is just made that much more easy, more simpler. The other thing, appointment of guardians for minor children.
Definitely.
The custodianship of minors' inheritances.
Yes.
The implications of not having a will, and where there are minors involved, now you've got the guardians fund, and then you've got the law of intestate succession, and what happens there in terms of how assets devolve if you don't have a will.
Yes,
it's all dictated by law.
Yeah.
Or not a signed one, or an improperly signed one.
Yeah.
There's many details that you have to consider.
Yeah. Peter, what I found is that people have every good intention of setting up a will, but they don't sign them. And we've come across so many cases where people haven't signed them, although we have a drafted will, and something happens over a weekend. It's over a weekend, and to wind up an estate, especially when there's no properly signed will, can take up to 2 years. So you're not setting the immediate problem, you're not creating a solution to a problem, you're creating a bigger problem down the line.
Exactly.
Where your family members who might not have any cash are having to wait for the estate to be wound up and end up going bankrupt, having to sell their houses, etc. Because they don't have funds to look after them in the interim.
Yes, wills at the best of times, even a well-structured and well-drafted will and structured estate can take 3, 4, 6 months to wind up, and people need money to live on in that time. So these kind of things need to be taken care of. If you look also at looking after minors' inheritances, you could use testamentary trusts, where trust could be set up in terms of the will, but it only comes into being upon the person's death. Appointment of guardians. For the bigger estates, you appoint an executor. Often clients will go to a bank, for example, and the bank say, yes, no, we'll do your will, we'll be the executor. The fees that are charged can be horrendous. The percentage of assets, never mind the liabilities, but assets, and that can be a lot of money.
Well, I think, also just to bear in mind that the masters are very strict with regards to who can wind up an estate nowadays. You have to have some legal guidance, or have to be quite informed, because every man and his dog has been seen to be doing it. The problem too with getting your family involved as executors, it's a very difficult time in their lives, having to wind up an estate of a family member that's very real to them, and having to go through the clothing, all the documentation. It's taxing on you as a person emotionally. So my opinion is that it's best to get someone that's an external person, that has an unbiased opinion, and that's not going to get involved in the fighting if there should be any.
Absolutely.
But
Takes the emotion out of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is a sad time.
Yes. Just to go on to the next topic, because this is a topic that we could chat about for hours on end. And we will get back to it, and we will have another video dedicated just to the proper drafting of a will and how it should be used in laying that solid financial foundation. Sandy, the other important thing is business owners. Business owners, you toil day and night for many, many years, whether you own the business on your own, whether you have business partners, you acquire value. It becomes a significant asset in your estate. But it's only, more often than not, it's only really worth something if you're still in the business.
Yeah, 100%.
And if something happens to you, you pass on, all of a sudden the value of that interest in the business can come under threat.
It does, yes.
So, how does one address that? How does one sort of secure the value so that the family do ultimately get the benefit of having been at home over weekends on their own, not seeing Dad until late at night, all those kind of things, Dad not being at the sports days and all that sort of thing. Work. How do you secure that?
Peter, it is important to understand that your business is impacted by an estate plan, and your family are impacted by your business, as the death of that person, your retirement planning, life policies, disability, etc. So very, very real need. What we found in the past is that you've had husband working all his life, and the wife has been staying at home. She gets left a business share, but she has no interest or experience in the business whatsoever.
Absolutely.
And she's now forced to come into the business. The other business or directors' hands go up in the air because they don't want the wife in the business because she doesn't know anything, but she wants her regular income.
Yes.
So it's important to set up a scenario where she can still benefit from the business, but without being involved in the business per se.
Yes.
And how we do that is generally through agreements and life cover policies that affect the agreements, which are through buy and sells.
Yes.
This allows business partners to take cover on one another's lives, and in the event of that person passing away, the policy pays out to the life insured's estate and relieves them of their rightful ownership, and allows the shareholder or director in the business to take their value of the business.
Nice and clean and tidy.
Yeah. So that there's no ramifications, the business capital isn't tapped into because they have to pay out the partner's share that's passed out, or the family for that matter.
Another big risk of a business, or a person in a business, who signs personal suretyships on behalf of the business. Often when you're in a big growth curve in a business, as a shareholder, as a partner, you will go and sign personal guarantees. Banks won't give you money unless you do, so it becomes a condition. And if there's a death and there's still money owing, and the bankers feel that the business won't have the wherewithal because suddenly a key person has been taken out of the picture, suddenly the bank's security is at risk. So they could very well go back to the personal estate and say, well, your husband signed a 2 million rand suretyship, and now your personal estate is going to be liable. So the two need to be addressed together.
Yeah. Peter, as I said, estate planning is holistic,
Yes.
and it plays into this very real need too. It also depends on how the business is structured. If a person is a sole prop and he has all his property and his business in his own name, it allows him to be attacked personally. Absolutely. By creditors, and all the sureties that he signed. I mean, if he is liable for it, the first thing the banks are going to do is come and want their money. So if he can take out a policy that'll secure those sureties, it actually will allow him to be able to in that instance specifically,
Yes.
settle that liability without it impacting on his estate and leaving nothing for the rest of the family or the business if he needs.
Sandy, thank you for those insights. And I think what we've perhaps achieved here is just raising the question. And perhaps we've put some thoughts into your minds as well. You know, if you're in this situation where you or a spouse is involved in a business, this really needs to be addressed, and addressed in detail with the right kind of people, with the right kind of skills. So I would urge you, please, approach your financial advisor. If you don't have one, you need to start looking around for one. They're not easy to find, I have to say, nowadays. There is a bit of a shortage. We're going through some serious changes in our regulatory environment, and good financial advisors are becoming a little bit like hen's teeth. What I'd like to do also is just the last topic, just very quickly, because we are dragging on a little bit, and I did promise we would keep it short, and we will cover these in a bit more detail in time to come. But the whole question of estate liquidity, you know, you talk about an estate plan, you talk about a will, you just mention the word estate, and people, I think it conjures up different images in people's minds. But really, an estate is just the net result of your assets and liabilities and commitments and so on. And the whole idea, I guess, for anyone planning their estate is to make sure that they cast off their mortal coil and there are no adverse repercussions on those that they leave behind. So, you know, we'd look at a statement of assets and liabilities. You'd want to set up structures to make sure that all the debts are settled. Any special bequests, particularly if they're cash, make sure there's enough money for that. You need to go through a whole cash flow exercise to see how much capital would be required to provide an income for the family that's left behind, pay for the kids' education, deal with inflation. It's a minefield. It really is a minefield.
But I think interesting enough to actually just see how much you're really worth on paper. It's a great exercise to do.
It can be quite ugly.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite scary. And, you know, people do tend to put their heads in the sand. They know they've got a problem. And yet it can be remedied so simply.
Yes.
It really can be remedied simply. It's not expensive to make provision for these things. And in fact, so often I've sat with couples and I've gone through these exercises, and they say, Peter, for the first time I actually understand what's going on, and I feel so much better having done something. And putting a financial plan in place does not happen overnight. It's not always possible to do everything that you need to do in one fell swoop, but it's a question of identifying the needs, prioritising, and then implementing as and when the wherewithal.
Well, look how long it takes people to get all their things together, Peter.
Exactly.
ID documents, marriage certificates.
Sandy, it's a very challenging kind of exercise, but it's very gratifying once you've done it.
Yes.
And once you get into that mindset discipline of reviewing it regularly, don't just do it once and say, right, I've got a financial plan. It has to be reviewed.
Definitely.
No question about it. We will, as I say, go into more detail in future videos. I look forward to having you back with me again to discuss some of these points, and very important points. Often you go to a doctor. I was chatting to a doctor the other day, and I said, you know, you've got people's lives in your hands. People depend on you, when you're doing an operation. And in the same way, you know, we have people's lives in our hands, financial lives. If we get it wrong, you know, there's implications. We try not to get it wrong. There are ways of ensuring that you deal with the risks. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. We have rambled on a little bit, but I'm sure you'll understand that it's very important. We certainly look forward to welcoming you and joining us on this educational journey. Sandy will be back, and we both hope that you learn by using this invaluable resource, and it'll stand you in good stead, that's for sure, in being able to make sound financial decisions and securing your financial future. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you view the next video in the series.